Hello and welcome to Day 12 of the Course in Mastery. Today, Tom Wood is going to share with you the secrets of negotiating, and Roger Dawson is going to talk about what he calls advanced tactics for power negotiating. Here's Tom.
Thank you, Coral. Today we're going to be talking about negotiating, getting what you want while you help others get what they want. Today you're going to be hearing from one of the world's greatest experts on negotiating. I can add a couple of points from my own experiences. Number one, people give concessions to people they like. Confrontational negotiating is possible, but it's much more difficult to get what you want. Also, in confrontational negotiating, the person on the other side is much more willing to walk away because of their emotions. Which brings in point number two. You must be able to walk away from the deal. Being able to walk away gives you a massive advantage in negotiating. Let me give you an example of how when I was 26 years old, I negotiated my way to doubling my salary and becoming the youngest director in a Fortune 500 company. I worked as an analyst for the management consulting arm of one of the largest publishers in the world. My job was to analyze the market, consult with clients, and get my name in the paper as often as possible. My first 2 years working at the firm, my name had appeared in over 200 publications around the world, including the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. I had done my job. Better yet, my competitors knew who I was. Well, it came time for me to negotiate my salary increase. Instead of the 5 to 10% that everybody gets every year, I wanted 200%. I knew that in order to get that kind of increase, I had to be able to walk away from the deal. So I spoke with one of our top competitors, went into interview with them, and told them that I would take nothing less than a certain income, which they had no idea was double my salary. We joked, we laughed, I told them how great it would be to work for them, but that they probably couldn't afford me. Well, they thought that things were going great, and they had an ego, and they said, "Of course we can afford you." You see, I got them to like me. They were willing to concede because they liked me. And also, I was willing to walk away, and they knew it. I got the job, but it wasn't over. Now, with this new job offer, I went back to my current employer, and I told them that I had been offered a job, and it looked like I was ready to go. Of course, they were in shock. They said, "What could possibly be the offer that got you to go?" And I showed them the offer, and their jaw dropped. I told them that, listen, there'd be just really one thing that would help me to stay. Two things, actually. One, you'd have to keep the current income that I have from this new offer, doubling my income, essentially. And the second thing is I wanted more responsibility. I wanted to be in charge of Asia. I wanted to be the director of Asian operations. Well, they knew I was willing to go, and they liked me. So they were willing to concede both of those things and keep me on. I essentially, in 1 hour, doubled my income and raised my level of responsibility within the company. Now, it turned out to be great for them, too, because as director of Asian operations, I brought in a boatload of money to the company. Everybody won, and that's the most important thing when you're finishing up a deal. Is it going to be a win-win? If it's not, why even start? There's a lot more to negotiating than those two things, but it's a great start. The more you master this skill, the more you get more of what you want in every area of your life. Here's Coral to introduce you to our expert for today.
Thanks, Tom. Today's expert, Roger Dawson, has a very successful business background, including being president for one of California's largest real estate companies. A full-time speaker since 1982, he is well respected and has trained people around the globe on how to improve profits and increase sales using power negotiating tactics. As he likes to say, you'll never make more money faster than you will when you're negotiating. In this clip, he discusses the second of 3 elements that affect the outcome of a negotiation. Make sure you use this tip to your advantage. Let's check it out.
The next thing I want to talk about that gives you power in dealing with people is time pressure. If you can give yourself all the time in a world in a negotiation, but at the same time convince the other side that they have a limited amount of time in order to resolve this, you develop a tremendous amount of power in dealing with people. There is a Pareto principle that applies here. Pareto was a 19th century Italian economist who was the first person to point out that 80% of the wealth of Italy was in the hands of 20% of the people. And that 80-20 rule seems to work in a lot of other areas too. Sales managers typically tell me 80% of my business is done by 20% of the salespeople. School teachers tell me 80% of the problems is caused by 20% of the children. In time management, we say the problem is we spend 80% of our time doing what gets us 20% of the results. So good time management turns that around and has us spending 80% of our time doing what gets us 80% of the results. In negotiating, 80% of the concessions will come down in the last 20% of the time available to negotiate. It's very clear when I do the workshop sessions in our all-day and two-day negotiating workshops that I have one particular workshop. I know that I give them 15 minutes to resolve this particular problem, and we time it. And I can walk around the room and I can see that not much is happening during the early stages of this negotiation. Then I start saying, okay, you have 2 minutes left and you must resolve this negotiation. A minute and a half left, 1 minute left, 30 seconds. And all of a sudden I'll see all these people coming together and making compromises and resolving the issue, because under time pressure, people become more flexible. What does this tell you? This tells you don't reveal your deadlines. If you have a deadline, don't let the other side know. Let's say that you've flown to Dallas for a business meeting and you have a return flight booked at 6 o'clock that evening and you have every intention of resolving the matter and catching that flight. Don't let the other side know about your reservation. Planes fly every hour out of Dallas. You can catch a later one. You can stay over until the next day. You will stay there until the matter gets resolved, because if you don't do that, if you don't have an open-ended time frame, you'll find they're pushing you against that time frame, doing all the negotiations at the very last minute. Some of my students have told me horror stories about negotiating in Japan, where they will be met in a limousine at the airport. They may be there for a week to resolve this issue, and the Japanese hosts are very gracious and very kind, and they'll take them out to play golf and for dinner in the evening, and which is something the Japanese like to do because they want to get involved with the personalities in the negotiation. They're much more relationship-based than we are as negotiators, but they also push it to the very last minute. Unless you're very, very careful, you'll find yourself in the limousine on the way back to the airport at the end of the week, wrapping up the negotiations, and you're very, very vulnerable under that kind of time pressure. So don't reveal deadlines, but if on the other hand you can establish that the other side has deadlines, it gives you power in a negotiation. Now you can have a situation where both sides are approaching the same time deadline. A simple example of that would be you lease some of your business property, and the lease is up for renewal on September the 1st. And you hear about time pressure and you think to yourself, hey, that sounds great. I think what I'll do is I'll wait until the very last minute to renew this lease. That'll put the landlord under the most time pressure to find a replacement tenant, and I'll do better that way. And then you think about it and you say, well, wait a minute. What's the difference between that and the landlord deciding that he will not renegotiate the lease with me until the very last minute, putting me under the most time pressure to find a new location? So we're both under the same time pressure. We're both approaching the same time deadline. Who should use time pressure? Who should avoid it? The answer to that is that the side with the most power in the negotiation can use time pressure. The side with the least power should avoid time pressure. Well, who has the most power in a negotiation? The answer to that is the one that with the most options has the most power. Options give you power in a negotiations. So you might take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle, and on the left-hand side of the line you put my options in the event I'm not able to renew this lease. How difficult is it going to be for me to find a new location? How expensive is it going to be? Or maybe I can find one for less money. How hard is it going to be to move the telephones and change the addresses on the letterhead and so on? What are my options? On the other side, you draw the landlord's options. How specialized is this property? How difficult will it be for this landlord to find a new tenant? So you list the landlord's options on the other side. Now you've got to do one more important thing. You've got to realize that you always think you have the weaker hand in the negotiations, because you know about the pressure that's on you, you don't know about the pressure that's on them. So you've got to compensate for that. But having done that, if one side clearly has more options than the other side does, they're the one that can use time pressure. The side with the least options has the least power. They should avoid time pressure and negotiate way ahead of the deadline. Another thing about time pressure is that the longer you can keep people in a negotiation, the more likely you are to get what you want. The next time you're in a negotiation, you're thinking, oh, I don't think this is ever going to go together. They're never going to come around to my way of thinking. I got to make some concessions to put this together. I want you to think of the tugboats out in the Hudson River in New York. That tiny little tugboat can move that huge ocean liner around if it does it a little bit at a time. Now, if it backs off and tries to force the ocean liner around, is it going to get anywhere? It's not going to get anywhere. Some people negotiate like that. They get all frustrated, they reach an impasse in the negotiations, they back off, and they try and force the other person to change their mind. Very rarely is that effective. Nudge people around a little bit at a time, you can get them to change their mind. But there's a big caveat here, and the caveat is that the same time pressure is working on you, too. The longer you're in the negotiation, the more likely you are to make concessions to them. You've really got to watch for this, otherwise you'll find yourself giving away all kinds of things you didn't intend to give away. You may have flown out to San Francisco for a big negotiation. You're there at 8:30 in the morning. You're bright, you're fresh, you're eager to get the negotiation settled, but it doesn't go as well as you hoped it would. And the morning drags on, and you break for lunch and you come back, and the afternoon drags on, you're still not reaching agreement. You break for supper, you come back, and the evening drags on. Now it's 10 o'clock at night, and unless you're very, very careful, you will make concessions to them that you would not have made at 8 o'clock that morning, and you will regret having made when you wake up the next morning. Why? Because your subconscious mind is saying to you, oh, I can't walk away from this after all the effort I've put into this. I can't walk away empty-handed from this when I've spent all this time and money on this. You should walk away if it's not the right thing to do. A fundamental understanding of decision-making is you've got to make the decision as it exists at that particular point in time. All the effort that you put in to get into that point, all the money that you spent to get to that point is gone. It's gone anyway. That is not good enough reason to pour good money after bad. This is one of the things that makes Donald Trump such a great negotiator. He's willing to pull the plug on projects because he reviews them periodically to see if it still makes sense. He spent over $100 million acquiring the site on Manhattan for what would become Television City. He was going to lure NBC away from Rockefeller Center. He spent tens of millions of dollars more negotiating with the city for the concessions he needed, getting architectural plans drawn for this huge project that would include a 150-story Trump Tower, by far the tallest building in the world. But then he's ready to go ahead with the project, and he takes one more look at it and says, wait a minute, this is not a good deal at this particular point in time. It was a good deal a month ago, 6 months ago. It was a terrific deal 5 years ago, but it's not the thing to do right now. And in spite of all the ego attached to this Trump Tower, tallest tower in the world, he pulled the plug on the project. You got to do that. You got to take a look at something as it exists at that particular point in time. Don't be lured into you listening to your subconscious mind saying to you, I've spent so much time on this, I can't walk away from it. So people become more flexible in relationship to the time that you've spent in a negotiation. The longer you can keep them in a negotiation, the more chance you have of getting what you want. But be careful that you're not giving away things just because you have been negotiating for so long. So the second element that always affects the outcome of negotiations is time pressure.
If this clip was of any interest to you, I recommend that you watch the full-length program that has a ton of information that will help you improve your negotiating skills. Tomorrow, we'll go over a skill so crucial to effective communication, Tom Wood discusses it as though it's a superpower, equivalent to being able to fly or be invisible. So make it a great day, and you'll see me tomorrow.